So, a new white paper has come out from the Center for Strategic International Studies. It is 165 pages long and it talks about a potential Chinese blockade of Taiwan and what the implications are from a tactical perspective as well as economic. And it does a great job of understanding what a blockade of Taiwan would look like on the tactical level, meaning what happens in and around Taiwan militarily. Sure, they expand broadly economically to the rest of the world, but this is my problem with what I've seen in just about every single war game study surrounding what China would do to Taiwan and the US response. They all love to focus on what is happening in and around Taiwan, when hopefully smart people in the Department of Defense understand that the United States' response doesn't need to be centered on defending the 30 or so miles surrounding Taiwan. We can cut China off at the knees nearly immediately, and we don't even have to be near Taiwan. All it takes is a blockade of the Malacca and Sunda Straits of Persian Gulf oil and energy. And in this entire 165-page CSIS report, not once do they run into the ground the implications of the United States running a counter blockade of China via the Malacca and Sunda Straits, thus denying China access to Persian Gulf energy. Not once. Period. It is not until page 129 of the report during free play game number 3 where they have one, yes, I said one single blurb that says there will be full convoy battles. But in this game, the United States has refused to provide forces for convoy escort. Instead, it imposed a distant blockade on Chinese shipping, implementing a board and seizure tactic in the Malacca and Sunda Straits. And at that point, I'm like, great, we're finally getting into the meat and potatoes of how we defeat China rather easily in this situation. But no, apparently I was wrong. They suddenly pivot the very next sentence to an airlift of Taiwan and then move on. They don't run anything into the ground with regard to a blockade of Persian Gulf oil heading to China. 165 pages, no more than a passing nod that says, oh yeah, the US could implement a blockade of Malacca and Sunda Straits, followed by zero analysis whatsoever. That is mind-blowing to me because such a blockade, implemented quite easily by the United States to keep Persian Gulf oil from getting to China, would bring the Chinese to their knees in 90 days. This is the Center for Strategic International Studies. I don't understand how you can have such a blind spot in what I assume is a heavily researched 165-page multi-author paper. Without Persian Gulf oil, the Chinese run out of oil in 6 months if flows still come in from Russia. But Russian pipelines provide only a small fraction of the Chinese oil needs, so they would eventually run out. Domestic production is another small fraction. The majority of Chinese oil comes via ships overseas from the Persian Gulf and across the Pacific Ocean from places like Canada and South America. And this assumes those Russian oil pipelines stay running because they're going to be destroyed, which is what Taiwan or the United States would do in the initial stages of this fight, thus causing China to run out of oil in 90 days. And it cannot sustain a fight with Taiwan, period, at that point. The Chinese do not have enough mass in their blue water navy to counter the United States more than a few hundred miles from their shores. They simply just don't. And the Chinese know this, which is why they conduct island building and they've focused heavily on what is called anti-access area denial operations in and around Taiwan, meaning their goal is to deny the United States the ability to have a tactical fight to defend Taiwan. But the trade-off when the Chinese were doing that is they don't have an expeditionary deep water navy. In fact, the only country in the world that has a globally reaching expeditionary deep water navy is the United States. That is why the United States can simultaneously defend Israel in the Middle East while conducting freedom of maneuver operations through the Taiwan Strait, as well as parking nuclear-capable submarines in the northern parts of Russia, all while have some ships in port and conducting training in the Mediterranean with our allied partners. No one else on Earth can do that. Not China. No one. So a naval blockade 1,300 miles away from China is easily executable by the United States and is nearly impossible for the Chinese to defend. And people will say, oh, well, the Chinese can just launch missiles from their mainland at these ships. And I don't think you understand how extraordinarily difficult it is to hit a ship with a long-range ballistic missile or a hypersonic missile. There's a reason that they're only used against stationary targets and buildings, and the missiles we've seen are line-of-sight missiles. I've made a video about the math that comes with that, and China just isn't that reliably capable yet. They're trying to develop the capability. And in fact, the United States is only barely capable at this point because of the amount of difficulty it is to develop seek and destroy style ballistic missiles. Because you got to understand that these ships move and they have defensive capabilities. And a moving ship, despite what we think is quite slow, in the 20 or 30 minutes it will take for that missile to get there, that ship could have traversed many miles in any direction from its initial point of detection. And that creates a grid that is several dozens of square miles across in every direction. And that means you're trying to hit an object on a dartboard that is 100 square miles across with something that is a few feet across. And yes, I understand that there are seek and destroy type missiles, but China hasn't reliably achieved that capability. Most of their stuff requires some sort of line of sight targeting to guide that long range missile in on its terminal phase. And I'm like, oh, so the trade off is instead of getting these missiles supposedly hitting us in the Malacca Strait 1,200 miles away, we're going to just dump all our ships off the coast of China and definitely get hit by missiles 100 miles away. That makes no sense whatsoever. So it is wild to me that in the year 2025, we can see war games from such a respectable publication, and they don't take such a massive strategic advantage of a blockade of Persian Gulf oil into account. And I'm starting to wonder if they're not doing this on purpose. Now, this paper talks about all of these ships being lost and all of these aircraft being lost and all of the tactical fights taking place. All this very sexy Top Gun Navy type stuff that makes a paper compelling and interesting to read, as well as interesting for the news to pick up and report on. No one wants to hear about the boring blockade thousands of miles away from the Chinese shore, but that's what's going to win this war. And the fact that they're not talking about it leads me to believe that this is either a fund-seeking endeavor in a manner that they wanted to paint such awful doom and gloom scenarios that there must be funding for more research on how to defeat China's Navy within 30 miles of Taiwan. And oh, by the way, you know who can conduct that research? The Center for Strategic International Studies. And then we'll give those papers to congressmen for them to wave in front of all of the rest of the congressmen and the president and say, we need more funding for our district's naval bases and our naval military industrial complex companies as a means for additional capability so that we can build the next sexy ship or missile or aircraft and beat China because look, they can beat us. I don't know, but once again, we have a study that is missing the easy button. And now over the next year, I'm going to see people in my comments talk about how China could easily destroy the United States, and they're going to wave this study in my face saying, see, you would lose 1,000 ships. And that's why I made that video where I keep telling you that these think tanks are wrong. They keep getting this wrong. And now I'm starting to think that they're doing it on purpose.